Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. Anakin's change into Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith felt like to some a change that came suddenly without much warning. However, we would get a more richly detailed story of Anakins Fall in the Clone Wars series, as well as comics, where the gritty war was shown in greater detail. At first, it would seem like Anakin was like any other Jedi general in this conflict, and in fact, an extremely successful one. With his constant victories came admiration, recognition, and praise by everyone except maybe the Jedi High Council. One would think that after all that, Anakin wouldn't just turn his back on everything that he fought for. And yet, when the time came, Anakin was ready to throw in the towel and invest in his greatest temptation, giving in to the dark side. While for people like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, the Clone Wars made them realize what was truly precious to them, and it emboldened them to continue fighting for what and who they cared for. But for Anakin, it was the exact opposite. Today, my friends, we are going to open up another holocron and explore a theory that the Clone Wars was likely what pushed Anakin far closer to the dark side than maybe even Palpatine personally. Of all the galactic conflicts that afflicted history, perhaps it was the 3-year engagement of the Clone Wars that was the most pivotal. With so many changes happening at once, the Jedi would find themselves on the front lines of a conflict that was far more than what they had bargained for. What was on the surface a civil war between the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems was actually a deep-seated political war with every party vying for ultimate control. Of course, with none of them realizing that ultimate control belonged to the Supreme Chancellor and the Dark Lord Palpatine. In this confusing time and grab for power, the Jedi Order would far overstep their reach and duty as peacekeepers, and at the behest of the Senate, became military leaders on behalf of the Republic, a fatal flaw. With the Jedi foregoing what made them the ideal arbiters of peace and justice, the dark side began to cloud their vision, and they only sunk further into their dogma and errance, blind to the machinations behind everything. They allowed their Jedi, no matter how inexperienced, to basically be raised on the battlefield. Padawans would be sent out and to die on the front lines next to their masters, which had psychological effects on every Jedi involved. But none would come out of the Clone Wars more scarred than Anakin Skywalker. Physical scars included. The only thing that the war taught Anakin was that he should be afraid to lose everything that he had ever cared to lose. In the war, Anakin grew to be the public face of the Jedi, the hero with no fear due to the stories of his daring missions, his escapes, and rescues. However, the title could not be further from the truth. It was that fear that drove Anakin to take those risks, and to do everything he could to win the day so that he could move one step closer to ending the war and saving everyone. The events of the Attack of the Clones greatly affected Anakin far more than people gave him credit. Even before the Clone Wars broke out, Anakin was going through emotional turmoil. To get a good basis, we can return to his childhood, where he was a young boy of 9 years old when he was taken into Jedi training. By this point in time, he had already experienced a life of attachment to his mother, and knew what it was like to have people he deeply cared about losing. He was then taken from his mother, and then had his father figure in Qui-Gon killed before him, before any training could occur. He formed a bond with Padme, but then had to leave her for almost 10 years. Whenever Anakin returned, he was dealing with feelings towards Padme that he didn't understand, and this only compounded when his entire mission was to keep her safe from an apparent assassination attempt made on her life. While this was going on, Anakin had his mother die right in his arms, and then he found out Obi-Wan had been captured on Geonosis. Following a failed rescue, Anakin and Padme were put in the Geonosian arena, where he assumed that he was going to die alongside his master and the love of his life. A narrow escape later, and he almost dies again at the hands of Dooku, losing his arm in the process and facing a real dark side threat for the first time. The Clone Wars broke out, and Anakin would get married in secret despite knowing the threat of losing her, as well as losing his place in the Jedi Order. When we really lay it all out, we come to realize that before the Clone Wars ever started, Anakin had experienced a great deal of fear and loss. With the knowledge that Padme's life would always be on the line as an influential senator in the Republic, and the growing threats all around Skywalker, Anakin grew more and more desperate after every single day. And then came the Battle of Jabim. Sometime recently, we made a video talking about the Battle of Jabim and how it was one of the darkest conflicts of the entire war, and it would be this battle that changed Anakin forever. We won't go through the entire battle again, but what we will do is mention that it was the battle where Anakin watched every single one of his Jedi comrades fall, one by one. And there was an accident during the battle that made it look like Obi-Wan had been killed as well. This was only a few months after the events of Geonosis, so Anakin was still just a Padawan. He later found Obi-Wan alive, despite having been captured and tortured by Ventress. And we can't forget that Obi-Wan faked his death during the latter days of the Clone Wars to assume the false identity of Rocco Hardeen, without of course telling Anakin. This put the young Jedi through the same traumatic stress of loss all again for nothing. Not to mention when he lost Ahsoka during the latter days of the war when she was falsely accused by Barriss Offee, blaming her for an attack on the Jedi Temple, and then eventually left the Order after her name was acquitted. Anakin watched many of his friends and comrades leave, die, or simply lose their minds during the war. But of course, the one person on his mind was Padme. The fear of losing Padme was constantly on his mind for many reasons. Her life was in danger because of the Separatists, and Dooku directly said that they wanted her dead. Their relationship was constantly in danger because if anyone found out about them, it would mean either he gave her up, or he would be expelled from the Jedi Order completely. And of course, a massive scandal in the political world that would ruin Amidala's reputation. Throughout all of this fear and loss, Anakin is completely unaware that he's about to lose himself too. Of course, there's no help from the Jedi Council. If anything, they exacerbate his problems, and even cause most of them. It was the Council's idea to keep Obi-Wan's fake death a secret from Anakin, the Council's choice to force a Padawan on him and then take her away. Their rules and dogma keep him from understanding the feelings that he has, and above all, the Council ultimately failed in bringing him into the fold of the Jedi from boyhood. Had they cultivated his training around the feelings he still had, and trained him properly out of fear of loss, teaching him more about it, about how difficult it was for him to leave his mother, then he may have been far more prepared. Ultimately, to say that it was the Council who failed Anakin is not a new take. But what was the larger toll of the Clone Wars? In Revenge of the Sith, we see that he's emotional, confused, and lost, and ultimately vulnerable to mental manipulation. He is finally able to get sound advice from Palpatine, the one person Anakin felt like was actually trying to understand him on a human level, and the Council then asked him to spy on the Chancellor. After this instance, and how Anakin responded to the task he was given, Obi-Wan lays out exactly what Anakin's whole deal is. He tells Mason Yoda that Anakin doesn't think in terms of peace or the greater good, that he's loyal to people, not ideals, and he's loyal to a fault. While most of the other Jedi would sacrifice one another in an instant if it meant serving the will of the Force and doing what was right for the greater good, Anakin would do the opposite. No victory is worth losing the ones that he cared for. This inherently is not a dark or a selfish desire. However, he will give him the ability to save everyone. He has been brought up his whole life being told that he's the chosen one and that he'll bring balance to the Force. And yet, every single one of his experiences says the opposite. He's incredibly talented with the Force and has excelled beyond all other Jedi in this category. So why is he still unable to do anything about this and to stop the suffering? Why did the Clone Wars happen? Why did he fail to prevent it when he should have had the power? The Clone Wars was the very galaxy spitting in the face of Anakin, forcing him to be trained and brought up in an era of war and turmoil, an era that would grow to define him. Anakin was criticized for being brash and arrogant, but pride stems from insecurity. Anakin isn't confident about having as much power as he does. I dare say he was ashamed of his power. Ashamed not only of his power level, but of the fact that he has so much power and still feels like he can do nothing with it. Over the course of the Clone Wars, the only thing standing between him and getting what he wants done is the Jedi Order itself. This pattern of thinking would leave Anakin to be disillusioned with the Council by the end. And honestly, if Dooku and Anakin had just had a long conversation, Anakin would have likely been tempted over to the dark side much sooner. On a side note that we want to conclude, I think that there also might be something to be said about Anakin's attitude towards combat as well. Many times we see Anakin smiling his way through battle and cracking jokes. This itself is not bad, as we see other masters like Kit Fisto doing it. However, Fisto's smile comes from a place of being at peace and feeling optimistic about the situation. I can't help but feel that Anakin's comes from a place of taking perhaps too much pleasure in combat. The young Skywalker always enjoyed the more physical and combative applications of the Force, which also may have had a hand in luring him closer to the dark side. It's not exactly the Jedi way to enjoy cutting things down and blowing things up. But of course, we might say that this stems from Anakin feeling like the battlefield was the only thing he really felt in control of. The only area where he was really trusted by the Jedi, and the only area he was allowed to excel in. Anakin learned war. These feelings linger in the time of Darth Vader, and soon the Emperor would be faced with trying to coerce his apprentice away from the battlefield to rule the Empire. The Clone Wars defined Anakin, and the Clone Wars in large part drew him to the dark side, his feelings of failure as a Jedi, and his fear of loss. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this, and how the Clone Wars itself heavily drew Anakin towards the darkness? Thank you as always so much for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.